I brought Sultai Ritual to a Canadian Highlander tournament, and I got a smooth 13th place out of 21 people. This tournament was the Joe King tournament, a tournament put on by a person in the community known as Joking 101. A lot of the best players on the scene were there, and I was there too. Good amount of people, good amount of decks. Everything went smoothly. They have commentators, they give color commentary, and they were really funny. The list I decided to bring is Sultai Midrange, also called Sultai Ritual or Bug Ritual. My friend Cole had been working on this list for a bit, and the idea was, let's take the Birthing Ritual list that Vast had been working on, and let's port it over into Sultai instead of Abzan, see how that works. Maybe have some graveyard shenanigans in there. The deck was really trying to go all in on just hating combo, and for the most part, I think it did that job, though I think cutting back on the removal like the list was incorrect and needs to run a couple more, but I'll get into my thoughts on that. Let's get into the deck itself. We'll start with my pointed cards. 2 Moxen. We've got Mox Sapphire and Mox Emerald. This should have been a Mox Jet, but I'm stupid and printed the wrong one. This deck is more green-black with blue than green-blue with black. 7th point here is Survival of the Fittest. Just a way to be a creature tutor, turn bad Banadork top decks into a threat in the late game. Vampiric Tutor. Grab anything top of your library at the cost of 2 life. Really powerful effect. And that brings us to our last pointed card, which is Natural Order. Really great way to tutor up certain cards. Atraxa, the big one, just looking at the top 10, putting one of different card types in hand. Pretty incredible. Big attacker, big blocker, really great for 4 mana. We're also running both Thruns, Thrun the Lastral and Thrun Breaker of Silence. Looking back into it, I probably wouldn't bring 5 mana Thrun, maybe just 4 mana Thrun. 5 mana Thrun's really great for the trample on it so that you can break through board stalls, and it has an extra point of power. But there was a lot of combo at the Joking tournament, so I don't think 5 mana Thrun was needed as much, and every time I saw it, I didn't really want it. But if you're expecting a lot of go wide, then I think 5 mana Thrun's a really good consideration for this. We're also running Questing Beast, just an incredible attacker, has way too many words on it. Then finally, for what I would consider the Natural Order package, we also have Undermountain Adventure, just our 4 mana way to take the initiative. Cantrips for the deck. Starting out with the classics, we have Gitaxian Probe, Preordain, Ponder, and Brainstorm. If you're running blue and you're not curving out at 3, and even if you are curving out at 3, I feel like most of these are just auto-include. Moving on to our 2 mana cantrips. First off, Malevolent Rumble, great card for the graveyard enabling as well for this deck. It just does a lot. It gives you card selection, fills your graveyard, and it technically ramps you or just gives you a blocker. Pillage the Bog is great in the early game. It's an insane top deck in the late game. I think this card's cracked. I think it's great at any point of the game. I could technically put Icefang Quaddle and Baleful Strix into threats if you consider ones with flying a threat, maybe against initiative decks, but I personally see these more as cantrips and their interaction in a way, especially Baleful Strix mainly, but they both come in, they both draw a card, they both have flying. Baleful Strix itself has Death Touch. This was really relevant. Finally, wrapping up the cantrips, we've got a new card from Duskmourn. We've got Overlord of the Flood Pits. Yes, this is technically also a threat. Just the ability to play it for impending, draw 2, discard 1 is really great. When it comes in the late game, once it gets off impending, you can pitch it away to like Eldritch Evolution and go find Atraxa because it's a 5. The Overlords are kind of underrated. I think some of them are decent, and we're running 2 that I think are decent in this deck. Now, what are we cantripping into? Well, we're cantripping into threats, of course, things we can use to win the game. Hex Drinker, just a great 1-drop. I was able to get to level 3 in a couple of games to make it a 4/4, which made it a lot more impactful. In the 2s, we have Psychic Frog, Bristly Bill, Ledger Shredder, Emperor of Bones, and Canker Blue. Psychic Frog. If you're in blue-black, you're probably playing Psychic Frog. This card's just cracked. Bristly Bill, all your land drops become counters for your creatures. You can also activate its ability to double all the counters on all of your creatures. Ledger Shredder. I'm not personally that high on Ledger Shredder usually, but the way it played in the tournament, I'm back on the high of Ledger Shredder. I get it. It's a 1/3 with flying. You play 2 spells, or just play a spell after. It's a 2/4 with flying that looted you a card. Emperor of Bones. Emperor of Bones. All right, this card right here, this card's cracked. This card was the real deal all day. So this thing is graveyard hate. This thing is a threat to make itself a 4/4. This thing is a reanimation spell for a turn. In one game, I milled my Atraxa, Emperor of Bones, exiled it. I adapted before I moved to attacks. Traxxas came back, looked at the top 10, refilled my hand, swung in with Atraxa and Emperor of Bones, massive damage. Also just incidental graveyard hate, which is amazing. Finally, in the 2s, we have Cankerbloom. This is pretty standard in a lot of green decks. Just 2 mana 3/2 is a decent stat. It's got relevant abilities. You can either naturalize an artifact or enchantment, or you can sack it to proliferate. In my 3-drop slots, we have Sentinel of the Nameless City, Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, Ursine Monstrosity, Oko Thief of Crowns. Sentinel of the Nameless City. This card is just great on rate, comes in, makes a map token, 3/4 with Vigilance, attacks, makes another map token. Uro, I don't think I need to introduce Uro. It just does a lot. It makes itself a late game threat. That hits your graveyard and suddenly you have a must deal with threat. New card from Duskmoor Commander, Ursine Monstrosity. All right, so it says choose a player at random. That's cracked in 1v1. It's just always attacking your opponent, mills a card, gives itself indestructible for the turn, gets +1/+1 for each card type in your graveyard. This card is insane. And last but not least, Oko. Now, Oko's weird. It can be a defensive card, it can be an offensive card. It's just a great utility card. Finally, in our 4-drop slot, we have Shielder of the Apocalypse and Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. Kaito's technically a 3-drop when you're using him right. He has Planeswalker Ninjutsu. He just becomes a really big threat out of nowhere. He's not a creature on your opponent's turn, so it's harder to interact with. You use this emblem twice and he's coming in for 5. He can also tap something down if need be for 2 turns. He can also offer card binning for your graveyard stuff and card draw. No introduction needed for Shielder of the Apocalypse. It's just an incredibly great Punisher and top end. We've got some Mana Dorks and other acceleration in the list. Birds of Paradise, Ignoble Hierarch, Noble Hierarch, Delighted Halfling, Deathrite Shaman. These are the 1-mana Mana Dorks. These are all really, really good. We're also running Troll of Khazad-dûm. This isn't really ramp, but it does help you find your land drops. Tutors outside of our points. We've got Birthing Ritual. We've got Neoform and Eldritch Evolution. Birthing Ritual, the name of the deck. Did not see it once in the tournament. In testing, this card has been absolutely cracked. It's a pseudo tutor that gets around opposition agents. Neoform and Eldritch Evolution. Eldritch Evolution can turn any of the overlords into Atraxa, which is really, really funny. Just being able to turn a 2 into any of your 4-drops, or a 3 into a 5. Neoform was incredibly relevant in one game, turning my Orcish Bowmasters into a Baleful Strix to help try and block a Psychic Frog, which was really great. Talked about this deck using the graveyard. Let's look at some pure graveyard enablers. We've got Stitcher's Supplier, Life from the Loam, Overlord of the Baelmerk, and Satyr Wayfinder. So all these cards help fill your graveyard. Stitcher's Supplier, just a 1-mana play that allows you to mill 3 when it enters or dies. Life from the Loam, not only can it help bring your lands back, it can also just keep milling 3 each turn to help fill your graveyard. The Loam engine is really good, especially with Psychic Frog. Overlord of the Baelmerk, you're almost always impending this for 2, just milling 4 and then bringing a creature Planeswalker back, non-avatar, you don't get your other Overlord. Oh well. Satyr Wayfinder enters, you mill 4, you can grab a land from them. All right, so that's how we fill the graveyard. How do we make the graveyard work for us though? For our payoffs, we have Reanimate, Chthonian Nightmare, Metamorphosis Fanatic, Abhorrent Oculus, and then 3 Goyfs. Calling these first 3 graveyard payoffs is kind of a meme. Reanimate, just good even if you're not going all in on graveyard shenanigans. Chthonian Nightmare, also really great alongside Birthing Ritual. It's another just good 2-mana enchantment if you're doing creature graveyard shenanigans. Metamorphosis Fanatic, our 1 miracle card, is just a 2-mana 4/4 with lifelink that reanimates something when it comes in. New card, Abhorrent Oculus. Card's nuts. 3-mana 5/5 that manifests dread at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep. You have to exile 6 cards, not a problem with this deck at all. And then of course, like any god-fearing mid-range deck in 2024, we are running 3 Goyfs. We have our classic Tarmogoyf, and then we've got our new contenders, Barrow-Goyf. I love Tarmogoyf for 3 mana, but it has Death Touch, lifelink, and enables itself with a mill attack. That's really insane. And then Nethergoyf, the 1-mana Tarmogoyf that only cares about your graveyard. This was a change I made from Cole's list when I went in with it. Not completely sold on running Nethergoyf. I think I'm gonna cut it. I just didn't like it that much. None of this matters if our opponent just kills us with a combo or just beats our head in. So how do we prevent that? Hand Disruption, we've got the classic 3. We've got Duress, Thoughtseize, Inquisition of Kozilek. I truly think if you're a black deck right now in Canadian Highlander, you should be running these 3. And then our last hand disruption piece is Grief. Wasn't sold on Grief going in, I'm sold now. The fact that it can be played for free if you exile a black card, or you can just sandbag it until you have 4 mana to play it for Thoughtseize and a 3/2 with Menace, and it can be reanimated. Moving on with Disruption, let's look at our 3 pure graveyard hate pieces. We have Scavenging Ooze, Bogart Trawler, and Endurance. I don't think I need to introduce Scavenging Ooze. Bogart Trawler, just the ability to get rid of an opponent's graveyard and have a 3/1 for 3, or otherwise just play a land for 3 life. I think Bogart Trawler fulfills its role really well. And then finally Endurance, again, instant speed evoke, really good. It can also just be a 3/4 for 3 that gets rid of the graveyard. If we need to kill things that are on the board, we have Abrupt Decay, we have Grist the Hunger Tide, and we have Fatal Push. Grist, for starters, helps enable the graveyard, puts up bodies, can technically win the game with the ult. Abrupt Decay, uncounterable, blows up something CMC 3 or less. Fatal Push, kills a creature for 1 mana, kills basically any creature for 1 mana if you have Revolt. 2 counter spells, quote unquote. We have Subtlety and we have Mental Misstep. Mental Misstep, you play this in any blue deck. 2 life, counter a 1-drop. Subtlety, the ability to evoke it at instant speed, again, is really great. This mattered in a Reanimator matchup when I Subtletied a Miracled Metamorphosis Fanatic. Finally, in our Disruption package, we have 4 cards that disrupt what your opponent's trying to do in very aggressive ways. Orcish Bowmasters, Opposition Agent, Tishana's Tidebinder, and Leovold, Emissary of Trest. Orcish Bowmasters kills mana dorks, punishes your opponents for drawing, domed my opponent a ton in a Time Vault matchup when they had the 1 ring out. Opposition Agent, flash in and prevent your opponent from searching. You know what this also helped? The Time Vault matchup. Tishana's Tidebinder, again, another flash threat. You can flash it in and shut off something's activated abilities, which is really relevant against, well, lots of things, honestly. And then finally, Leovold, Emissary of Trest. I think the primary reason I like this card is just being able to shut off your opponent's ability to draw multiple cards in a turn. Lands are pretty standard in this deck. I do want to draw attention to a few choices in it. Shifting Woodland, Wasteland, Otawara Soaring City, and Boseiju Who Endures. I have not been a particular enjoyer of the channel lands in the past. After playing this tournament, play the channel lands if you can. As long as you're not a greedy mana base, please play the channel lands. They're so good. We also have Wasteland, just blowing up non-basic lands. Keep your opponent honest. Great. Shifting Woodland, just being able to be a copy of any of your permanents in the graveyard can be relevant. Just go on the beatdown plan from the graveyard. All right, that's the list. Let's go into how my rounds went.
What do you mean there's only soup? It means there's only soup.
Round 1 was up against Czech. Czech midrange, Czech control, and we're gonna say midrange. This was the round where I really got my jitters out. I kept a really sketch hand game 1 with 4 lands, 2 mana dorks, and Satyr Wayfinder. I immediately got Thoughtseize, lost my Delighted Halfling, played turn 2 Satyr Wayfinder, which immediately milled 4 cards that I didn't want it to mill. Didn't hit a single land to grab, not that it really mattered. I really just drew lands for the rest of that game, and I really shouldn't have kept such a sketch hand in the first place. Game 2, I really think I could have gotten game 2, but I really died to death by 1,000 mistakes. This is something I really like about Canadian Highlander. This game came down to the wire, and I lost. I can pinpoint exactly when I lost. I had Ledger Shredder out, my opponent had Bowmasters, and I wasn't respecting the Bowmaster's triggers. Because of this, he was able to get the Bowmaster token to a 3/3, which was relevant because now he had something that could potentially block Questing Beast. He was also able to block my 4/4 Hex Drinker by double blocking it, which was very, very relevant. If I had just played around the triggers better, I think I could have got there. I was playing my heart out this game. I did some really fun plays. My opponent Intuition for 3 removal spells. One of them was Unholy Heat. I gave them Unholy Heat. They tried to Unholy Heat my Ledger Shredder. I used Bristly Bill's activated ability to double the triggers on Ledger Shredder, so it survived the Unholy Heat even with Delirium. I got my opponent down to 1 life, but then their usage of Oko and Minxkambu and Deathrite Shaman, especially to help stabilize their life total, just really started putting the nails in the coffin for me, and I just was unable to take it, so I lost round 1, 0-2.
I'm going on an adventure!
All right, so round 2 was against Turbo Ring. Game 1, I kept a hand that was fine against midrange and terrible against Turbo Ring. I lost to Turbo Ring combo, if you could believe it. Game 2, I kept a hand with both Boseiju and Duress in it. I used my turn 1 Duress. I see that my opponent has 3 Fairy. I see that my opponent has City of Solitude. They have Silence, and they have Insatiable Avarice. So I took the 1 tutor in their hand. My opponent goes to Fairy Uptick. I go for an attack with my Ice Fang Twaddle. I then ninjutsu in Kaido. This is the one game I saw Kaido to slam into Teferi. Went for the Kaido emblem because wasn't really a reason to dig. I am just the beatdown right now. Next turn, I played land, slammed the Questing Beast in my hand, swung in with both Questing Beast and Kaido after activating for emblem, of course, used Questing Beast to finish off Teferi with its ability, and at that point, my opponent was out of answers. They were dead on board. They conceded, so we moved on to game 3. Game 3 was really rough for my opponent. They had to take a mull to 4, which is incredibly rough no matter what you're playing. I kept a hand with Duress and Grief in it. My opponent goes turn 1 Tapland Lotus Petal. I go turn 1 Duress. They Enlighten Tutor in response for the 1 ring. The only thing left in their hand is a land. They play land. I'm just playing beatdown, developing my board a little bit. They get to 3 mana, and then I hard cast Grief to pull 1 ring out of their hand. They were digging for answers. They were able to Orm's Chant Kicked me to delay me for a turn. They were looking for the Swords to Plowshares, and they were unable to find it. So I was able to take game 3 after my opponent's unfortunate mull to 4.
Wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Round 3 was up against Time Vault, a deck I had never played against before. To be honest, I hadn't played against any of these before other than Czech. I kept a hand with Grief and it could reasonably curve, but by reasonably curve, I mean I don't really have much to do until turn 3. Fortunately, my opponent doesn't really have much to do until turn 3, and we just kind of durdle for a little bit. Turn 4, I top deck a Gitaxian Probe and look at their hand to see if I should be firing Grief. I see Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Balance. So then I proceed to use Grief to take the balance, and then the following turn I slam 4 mana Thrun. Thrun starts getting in for damage. My opponent Tainted Pacted for a Psychic Frog, but then played a Talisman tapping the wrong mana, so they couldn't play Psychic Frog that same turn. Play Hierarch, get in for 5, and then Neoform Hierarch into Baleful Strix. My opponent then, a couple turns later, tries to attack with Psychic Frog, forgetting that Baleful Strix is there. I immediately moved to block with the Baleful Strix, and unfortunately, they had to use their Otawara on my Baleful Strix to keep their Psychic Frog alive. So I replay Baleful Strix my next turn, swing in with Thrun again. My opponent plays Shifting Woodlands. They have Delirium online, which means the Shifting Woodland can effectively become Psychic Frog for a turn to help protect them for another turn. I then top deck Pillage the Bog. I use it for 16. I find Wasteland. I have Abrupt Decay in hand. I Abrupt Decay the Psychic Frog. I Wasteland the Shifting Woodlands so they can't have a blocker, and I attack in for game. In game 2, I keep a hand that curves really well, but can only make blue-green, and I kept an Inquisition of Kozilek, but I'm thinking, hey, I'm on the draw. I'll find black eventually. I immediately then luck out on my first draw step and draw Bayou, so I play Bayou, Mox Emerald, Inquisition of Kozilek. I'm able to snag a loose focus off of that. I see that they've also got a mana leak in their hand, so I play Barrowgoyf turn 2 to eat the mana leak, and then on turn 3, I slam Grist the Hunger Tide. My opponent then slams the One Ring and starts to use it for draws. I top deck Opposition Agent. My opponent plays a fetch land, cracks the fetch, and then they play Sowing Mycospawn. So in response to its cast trigger, I flash in my Opposition Agent. I'm able to take Urza Saga out of their deck, see their entire deck list. At this point, I do hardcast a Grief that I drew just because I know they have Path to Exile, so I take that Path to Exile out of their hands so they can't get rid of Opposition Agent. Next turn, they play Oko, they Elk Opposition Agent, so I can't prevent their searching. So they're holding up mana for a Brain Surge that I know is in their hand because of Grief. I fetch for a Surveil land, I see Orcish Bowmasters, I keep Bowmasters on top, draw Bowmasters, I swing in to kill Oko. This is a misplay on my part, I got very lucky. I should have swung at him and then used Grist Downtick to kill the Oko instead, because this way he would have been just dead to the Orcish Bowmasters and One Ring trigger. Slight misplay, gave a window. I got lucky here, but that was a misplay. End step, they Brain Surge. In response, I play Orcish Bowmasters, shoot them for 5 off of Bowmaster's original trigger, and then the 4 draws off of Brain Surge. This is effectively also shutting off their One Ring because Bowmasters is making this a real problem. They're dead on board. They play Sensei's Divining Top and Spin Top to try and find balance, and they don't find it. They concede. I win against Time Vault round 3, 2-0.
This is stupid knowledge. You cats ain't ready, you heard?
Round 4 was up against Paradox Academy. Game 1, he keeps a reasonable hand as long as he can find his second land. He stumbles on finding his second land. Because of this, I'm able to develop a little bit. Emperor of Bones comes in clutch here. I use Overlord of the Baelmerk. I mill over an Atraxa. I then use Emperor of Bones to reanimate Atraxa for the turn, swing in, refill my hand, and I'm just able to keep the pressure up against my opponent, and I win game 1. I actually almost punted in this matchup by forgetting about 3 Fairies effect, and I held an Opposition Agent I got off Atraxa in my hand instead of just playing at sorcery speed. My opponent had a tutor. Fortunately, they were 1 mana short to play something to just block Emperor of Bones, so I really lucked out there. Game 2 against Paradox Academy was absolutely rough. My opponent just went for the Urza Saga beatdown plan, made some Karnstructs off of it that were big because artifacts. And unfortunately, I was unable to get big enough bodies or draw my removal spells at the right time to be able to win this, so I just kind of died to Urza Saga beatdown very quickly. Not a lot to say about this game. Game 3, my opponent goes for the Walking Ballista beatdown plan. This was obnoxious because alongside Tolarian Academy, he was able to uptick it with more counters and then immediately shoot anything I was trying to keep on the battlefield. I really thought I was gonna lose to Walking Ballista Beatdown, but I successfully top decked a Boseiju, was able to blow up the Walking Ballista. At this point, we're in turns, and both of us are just able to successfully keep each other's pieces off the board, so neither of us are able to take the win. So round 4 ended with a 1-1 draw.
Wait a minute, I'm not supposed to lose. Let me see the script.
Finally, we go to round 5. Round 5 is the win and in versus Reanimator. Unfortunately for me, if you think that Reanimator is a glass cannon deck, please take that notion aside. Reanimator in Canadian Highlander tends to be a combo control deck. It's really just trying to keep you at bay and keep you from doing anything until it just goes, oops, here's Archon of Cruelty. So this is the game where turn 2, my opponent keeps a Valgavoth in their grave, doesn't reanimate it. I go for the Emperor of Bones turn 3, exile Valgavoth, reanimate it at the beginning of combat as well with the adapt, swing in with Valgavoth, it's exiled, it's gone, Emperor of Bones, MVP, and then followed up immediately with being able to subtlety a Metamorphosis Fanatic, miracled off the top, went back to the top obviously. So this was a great start, but unfortunately my opponent is able to just miracle in the 4/4 with lifelink, which Emperor of Bones can't attack through, play Psychic Frog, is able to buff it. I don't draw one of my 2 removal spells at that point to get rid of Psychic Frog, which was rough, and I just wasn't able to push through enough, and ultimately I just was unable to close out game 1 against Reanimator. Okay, game 2 was really rough. I mulled the 5. My hand was 2 lands, Mana Dork, Ursine Monstrosity, Barrogoyf, a completely reasonable 5. I go turn 1 Mana Dork, turn 2 Ursine Monstrosity. Ursine Monstrosity just eats a removal spell, gone. No big deal, Barrogoyf time. My opponent then on their turn proceeds to go Wasteland my tropical island. I'm down to 2 lands. I never find the 3rd land for it to matter. I just get completely blown out this game. I am unable to win. So all in all, for a deck that I never played against a real person before, 2-2-1 is a really strong finish. Just lost the win in. Midrange is an archetype in Canadian Highlander that I have the most experience with, so I felt comfortable playing it for the event. Let's talk about cards that I thought were good and cards that I thought were bad. All right, so cards that I thought were really good and overperformed in my eyes. Kaido, Ledger Shredder, Emperor of Bones, and Grief. Kaido was a new card. This was actually one of my inclusions that deviated from Cole's list. I really wanted to try it. Card overperformed. This card's really good. It's a great threat. It has great effects against basically every matchup. Ledger Shredder, I have been down on Ledger Shredder for forever. This really sold me on it. This card just gets big really fast. Emperor of Bones, this card overperformed. Oh my god, if you are playing black midrange, please play Emperor of Bones if you expect even a little bit of graveyard. If you are using your own graveyard even a little bit, use Emperor of Bones. Finally, we have Grief. Grief isn't really a card that I played in many Canadian Highlander decks, but I understand why it's in this deck. It's effective disruption. You can use it whenever you want as long as you have a black card in your hand for free. You can also sandbag it until later to play it also as a creature. With these 4 out of the way, let's move to the cards I was not impressed with and cards I'm probably going to be cutting. Going to start with these 2, Stitcher's Supplier and Satyr Wayfinder. I just didn't think they did enough for the deck. I don't think these cards are good enough for your graveyard to justify keeping around. I think if you're keeping one, keep Satyr Wayfinder. Not impressed with Stitcher's Supplier at all. Survival of the Fittest. We just got a point announcement today. Thassa's Oracle from 7 to 6. Strip Mine from 2 to 1, Renin 6 from 0 to 1. This is becoming Strip Mine. I just don't think it's great if you're not running Silver Bullets. We're not a Silver Bullet deck. If you want to make it a Silver Bullet deck, run like a Collector Roof, keep Survival of the Fittest. And that concludes my tournament report on the Joe King tournament. I think I really took a lot away from playing. 2-2-1 is really great for just playing this deck for the first time, much less in a tournament. And I think it's a deck I'm going to stick with. I'm planning on doing a full deck tech for this list, showing some gameplay in the future. So if you want to see that, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you get notified for when that video comes out. Until next time, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.